The gunshot that killed Rebecca Bryant's father echoed through the Montana Canyon long after his body hit the ground. And as she stood over his grave with nothing but $17 and a wagon full of regret, she realized survival would require more than tears. The year was 1876, and Ordway, Montana Territory, had become her destination purely by accident. The small cattle town nestled in the valley between two mountain ranges seemed as good a place as any to disappear, to start over, to figure out how a 20-year-old woman with no skills and no family was supposed to survive in a world that had little patience for either. Her father had been a gambler, a dreamer, a man who promised her mother on her deathbed that he would take care of their daughter. He had tried in his own way, but a bullet meant for someone else did not care about promises or little girls who grew up watching their father chase fool's gold from one town to the next. Rebecca pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as the wagon rattled into Ordway's Main Street. The buildings were a mix of weathered wood and newer construction, speaking to a town that was trying to establish itself, but had not quite decided what it wanted to be. A saloon stood next to a church, a bank across from a brothel, as if the town itself could not make up its mind between salvation and sin. She had 23 cents left after buying supplies in the last town, and the horse pulling her wagon looked about as tired as she felt. The general store seemed like the logical place to start. Rebecca tied up the horse and stepped inside, where a portly man with spectacles looked up from his ledger. His expression shifted from welcoming to wary in the space of a heartbeat, the way men's faces often changed when they realized a woman was alone. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. "I am looking for work," Rebecca said, lifting her chin. "Any kind of work. I can clean, I can sew, can you cook?" The voice came from behind her, deep and rough like gravel underfoot. Rebecca turned to find a man standing in the doorway, his frame blocking out the afternoon sun. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. Dust covered his clothes, and he wore a gun belt low on his hips, but his expression was not unkind. "I can cook beans," Rebecca heard herself say, then immediately wanted to bite her tongue. The man's eyebrows rose slightly and she felt heat creep up her neck. "I apologize, that came out wrong. What I meant to say is, then beans will be my favorite forever," the man interrupted, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Name's Dalton Ward. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of here. My cook ran off last week to try his luck in the gold fields, and my men are about ready to mutiny if they have to eat my cooking one more day." Rebecca blinked, certain she had misheard. "You are offering me a job, just like that?" "Can you start tomorrow?" Dalton asked instead of answering her question. "Room and board included plus $30 a month. You will have your own quarters, separate from the bunkhouse. My ranch is respectable and I run it that way. Any man who does not treat you with courtesy will be looking for work elsewhere. Those are my terms." She should have been suspicious. She should have asked more questions, demanded references, done any number of sensible things. But Rebecca's stomach was empty, her purse was nearly the same, and this man with his storm cloud eyes was looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer rather than a problem to be solved. "I can start tomorrow," she said. Dalton nodded once, sharp and decisive. "I will be here at dawn with a wagon. Bring whatever you have." He tipped his hat to her, nodded to the store owner, and was gone before Rebecca could think of anything else to say. The store owner let out a low whistle. "Well, I will be. Dalton Ward does not usually take to strangers so quick." "You must have made quite an impression." "I told him I could only cook beans," Rebecca said faintly. The man laughed, a sound that shook his considerable belly. Then I reckon he meant what he said about them being his favorite. Dalton Ward is not a man who says things he does not mean. Rebecca spent that night in her wagon, parked behind the general store with the owner's permission. Sleep came in fits and starts, her mind racing with everything that could go wrong. She knew nothing about this Dalton Ward except that he owned a ranch and apparently had terrible cooking skills. For all she knew, she was riding straight into disaster. But what choice did she have? The world was not kind to women alone, and opportunities did not knock twice. Dawn came cold and clear, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Rebecca was already awake, had been for hours, her few possessions packed and ready. The dress she wore was her best, which was not saying much, a faded blue calico that had been her mother's, carefully mended in a dozen places. She had washed her face in the creek behind the store and pinned her dark hair as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror. Dalton arrived exactly when he said he would, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses that looked considerably better fed than Rebecca's tired mare. He climbed down and surveyed her meager belongings without comment, loading them into the wagon with efficient movements. "Your horse can follow behind," he said. "She looks like she could use a rest from pulling weight." It was a kind observation, delivered in a matter-of-fact tone that kept it from feeling like pity. Rebecca nodded and climbed up onto the wagon seat. Dalton settled beside her, took up the reins, and guided the horses north out of town. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the morning songs of birds. Rebecca snuck glances at the man beside her, trying to figure him out. He was older than her, probably close to 30, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work. His hands on the reins were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who did not shy away from hard labor. But there was something else about him too, a quietness that felt deliberate rather than uncomfortable. "You are wondering why I hired you," Dalton said suddenly, not taking his eyes from the road. Rebecca startled. "I suppose I am curious, yes. My ranch is called the 3 Bars. I run about 200 head of cattle, plus horses. I have 8 men working for me right now, good men, but they need feeding 3 times a day. My cook, Pete, he was with me for 5 years before he got gold fever. I have been trying to manage it myself for the past week, but I am a rancher, not a cook. The men are complaining, productivity is down, and I am losing my mind trying to remember which pot is for what." He paused, then added, "When I saw you in that store, I saw someone who needed a chance. I figured we could help each other out. Even though I can only cook beans." The words slipped out before Rebecca could stop them. This time Dalton did look at her, and the smile that crossed his face transformed him entirely. "Miss Bryant, I have eaten beans for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the past week, and I have managed to burn half of them and undercook the other half. If you can make a pot of beans that is actually edible, you will be a miracle worker in my book." Rebecca felt an answering smile tug at her own lips. "I suppose I should confess something. I can actually cook more than beans. I am not very good at it, but I can manage basic meals. Beans are just the thing I am most confident about." "Then we will have beans often, and you can practice the rest," Dalton said simply. "I am not expecting fancy food. I am expecting my men to stop threatening to ride into town and never come back." The ranch appeared over a rise, and Rebecca caught her breath. It was bigger than she had imagined, with a main house built of solid timber, a large barn, a bunkhouse, several smaller outbuildings, and corrals that held more horses than she could quickly count. Cattle dotted the valley beyond, dark shapes against the green grass. Mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite the summer season. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Dalton's expression softened. "It is home. My father started this place 30 years ago with nothing but determination and debt. I inherited both when he passed. Took me 10 years to pay off what he owed and make this place profitable. Every board, every fence post, every head of cattle represents something I built or bought with honest work." He paused. "I am telling you this so you understand that I take the 3 bars seriously. The men who work for me, I take them seriously too. You will be safe here, Miss Bryant. You have my word on that." Rebecca believed him. She could not have said exactly why, but she did. The wagon pulled up in front of the main house, and immediately several men emerged from various buildings, curiosity written plainly on their faces. Dalton climbed down and turned to help Rebecca, his hands steady at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. The touch was brief and proper, but Rebecca felt the strength in those hands, the easy way he managed her weight. "Listen up," Dalton called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "This is Miss Rebecca Bryant. She is our new cook. You will treat her with respect, you will not curse in her presence, and you will eat whatever she puts in front of you with gratitude. Anyone who has a problem with any of that can collect their pay and ride out." "Clear," a chorus of agreement rippled through the assembled men. Rebecca counted 8 of them, ranging from a boy who could not have been more than 16 to a grizzled man whose beard was more gray than brown. They were all watching her with varying degrees of interest, but Dalton's warning had clearly been heard. "Miss Bryant, let me show you to your quarters," Dalton said, picking up her small trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Then I will introduce you to the kitchen, and you can see what we are working with." Rebecca followed him to a small building attached to the back of the main house. It had its own door and 2 windows with actual glass, a luxury she had not expected. Inside was a single room with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small dresser, and a rocking chair. Simple but clean, and more privacy than she had known in months. "The main house has a sitting room and dining room for when I have business guests," Dalton explained. "But mostly I eat with the men in the bunkhouse dining hall. That is where you will be cooking. There is a lock on this door, use it. The outhouse is shared, but it is on this side of the yard, away from the men's quarters. If you need anything, if anyone bothers you, you come find me immediately." "Understood, understood," Rebecca said. "Mr. Ward, I thank you did not have to take a chance on me." "Dalton," he corrected. "We do not stand on formality much out here, and Miss Bryant, everyone deserves a chance. The question is what we do with it." He showed her to the kitchen next, a large room attached to the bunkhouse with a massive cast iron stove, more pots and pans than she had ever seen in one place, and supplies that made her eyes widen. Sacks of flour and beans, sugar, salt, dried meat, canned goods, fresh vegetables from what must be a kitchen garden somewhere. After months of scraping by, the abundance was almost overwhelming. "Pete kept a list of what the men like," Dalton said, pointing to a piece of paper tacked to the wall. "But honestly, at this point, anything hot and edible will make them happy. Breakfast is at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Coffee should always be ready. Can you manage that?" Rebecca squared her shoulders. "I can manage that. Then I will leave you to it. First dinner is in about 8 hours. Good luck." After he left, Rebecca stood in the center of the kitchen and took a deep breath. She could do this. She had to do this. Cooking for 1 or 2 people was very different from cooking for 9 men who worked hard physical labor all day, but she would figure it out. The alternative was unthinkable. She started by familiarizing herself with everything in the kitchen, taking inventory, learning where things were kept. Then she studied Pete's list. Apparently the men liked biscuits, liked beef when they could get it, tolerated chicken, and wanted coffee strong enough to strip paint. There were notes about who did not like onions, who would eat anything if there was enough gravy on it, and a comment that beans were always acceptable as long as they were not burned. Beans. Well, that much she could definitely handle. For her first dinner, Rebecca decided to play it safe. She made an enormous pot of beans with salt pork, a pan of cornbread and coffee that she hoped was strong enough to meet expectations. It was simple, basic, but it was food she knew she could execute properly. As 6 o'clock approached, her stomach twisted with nerves. What if they hated it? What if she had already failed? The men filed in exactly at 6, Dalton among them. They all cleaned up first, washing hands and faces at the pump outside, hanging their hats by the door. Rebecca had set the long table with mismatched plates and utensils, put out the food in serving dishes the way her mother had taught her for Sunday dinners a lifetime ago. The men sat, looking at the table, then at her. No one moved. "It is not fancy," Rebecca said, hating how nervous she sounded. "But it is hot and it is edible." Dalton reached for the beans first, spooning a generous portion onto his plate. "Smells good," he said, then took a bite. His expression did not change for a moment, and Rebecca's heart sank. Then he nodded. "These are damn fine beans." "Pardon my language, Miss Bryant, but these are the best beans I have had in months." It was as if his approval broke a dam. The other men dug in, and soon the only sounds were eating and the occasional grunt of satisfaction. The cornbread disappeared in minutes. The bean pot was scraped clean. Someone asked if there was more coffee, and Rebecca hurried to refill cups, trying not to show how pleased she was by their enthusiasm. After they had all finished, the grizzled man with the gray beard pushed back from the table and addressed her directly. "Name is Frank, miss. Been working cattle for 35 years, and I have eaten in a lot of cow camps and ranch kitchens. That was a fine meal. Simple, but that is what makes it good. Thank you." The others echoed his thanks, and Rebecca felt something warm bloom in her chest. Pride, maybe, or relief. Or perhaps just the unfamiliar feeling of being appreciated. The men filed out, and Dalton lingered, helping her clear the table despite her protests. "You did well," he said. "I know it was just beans and cornbread, but you have no idea what we have been eating. This was a feast in comparison. I will try to expand the menu as I get more comfortable with the kitchen," Rebecca promised. "But I wanted to make sure I did not ruin everything on the first night." "Smart." Dalton handed her a stack of plates. "Get some rest tonight. 5 in the morning comes early, and the men will be expecting breakfast." He was right about that. Rebecca woke in the dark, her body protesting the early hour, and made her way to the kitchen by lantern light. She made coffee first, strong and black, then started on biscuits and bacon. By the time the men arrived, she had everything ready, and they ate with the same enthusiasm they had shown at dinner. The first week passed in a blur of meals and cleaning and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Rebecca fell into bed exhausted each night, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from honest work and knowing she had earned her place. The men warmed to her gradually, offering her smiles and snippets of conversation. They told her about the ranch, about the cattle drives, about the hard work of keeping everything running. She learned their names and their preferences, who liked their eggs scrambled and who wanted them fried, who needed extra coffee to wake up and who was cheerful from the moment he walked in. And Dalton. Rebecca found herself watching for Dalton, noticing things about him she had no business noticing. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the rare smile that made his whole face lighter, the careful way he spoke to her, always respectful, never presumptuous. He worked as hard as any of his men, harder even, up before dawn and often the last one to call it a night. He checked on the cattle, mended fences, broke horses, handled the business side of the ranch with the same competence he showed in everything else. She caught him watching her sometimes too, though he always looked away when their eyes met. It should have made her uncomfortable, but it did not. There was nothing predatory in his gaze, nothing that made her feel unsafe. If anything, he seemed curious, as if he was trying to figure her out the same way she was trying to understand him. 2 weeks after she arrived, Rebecca decided to try her hand at a proper roast for dinner. She had been practicing, getting more confident with the kitchen, and the men seemed happy enough with her cooking that she felt ready to attempt something more ambitious. She prepared the beef carefully, surrounded it with potatoes and carrots from the garden, and put it in the oven to roast slowly through the afternoon. The smell filled the kitchen and drifted out across the yard. Men kept finding excuses to walk past, sniffing appreciatively. Rebecca hid her smile and kept working. Dinner was a success. The men ate with focused determination, going back for seconds and thirds. Frank declared it the best meal he had eaten since leaving St. Louis. Even the quiet boy, whose name was Tommy, spoke up to say it was better than what his mother used to make, then blushed furiously at his own boldness. After the men left, Dalton stayed behind again. He had been doing that more often lately, helping with cleanup, lingering to talk. They had fallen into an easy rhythm of conversation, sharing stories about their pasts in careful, edited versions. Rebecca had told him about her father without mentioning the gambling or the debts. Dalton had told her about building up the ranch without mentioning what she suspected had been years of loneliness. "You have a gift for this," Dalton said, drying a plate with more care than necessary, "for making a place feel like home. These men, they work hard, but there is more to life than work. Having good food, having someone care enough to make it well, that matters." "It is just cooking," Rebecca said, but she felt her cheeks warm. "It is more than that." Dalton set down the plate and turned to face her fully. "Miss Bryant, Rebecca, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no without any consequences to your job." Rebecca's heart started beating faster. "All right. There is a dance in Ordway this Saturday. The town has them once a month, and I usually go to show my face, do some business, that sort of thing. Would you consider attending with me? As my guest?" The kitchen suddenly felt very small. Rebecca was acutely aware of Dalton standing close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell the scent of leather and soap that clung to him. "I do not have a dress suitable for a dance," she heard herself say, and immediately wanted to kick herself. Of all the responses she could have given, that was possibly the most ridiculous. But Dalton just smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made him look years younger. "Then we will stop by the general store first. I owe you a month's pay anyway, and you have more than earned it. You can buy whatever you need." "I cannot let you buy me a dress," Rebecca protested. "I am not buying you a dress. You are buying yourself a dress with money you earned. I am just providing transportation and terrible dancing skills." His expression turned more serious. "But if you would rather not go, I understand. I do not want you to feel pressured." Rebecca thought about it. Thought about this man who had given her a chance when she had nothing, who had been nothing but kind and respectful, who looked at her like she mattered. Thought about how her heart had started doing foolish things whenever he was near, how she had started listening for his footsteps, watching for his arrival at meals. "I would like to go," she said softly. "Thank you for asking." The smile he gave her could have lit up the whole valley. Saturday arrived bright and warm. Rebecca had been given the afternoon off to prepare, and she had used some of her earnings to buy fabric from the general store during a trip to town for supplies earlier in the week. She was not an expert seamstress, but she could manage a simple dress, and she had worked on it every night by lamplight, determined to have something new to wear. The dress was green, the color of new leaves, and it fit her better than anything she had worn in years. She pinned her hair up carefully, allowing a few curls to escape and frame her face. She had no jewelry except her mother's silver locket, but it would have to do. Dalton arrived at her door precisely when he said he would, and the look on his face when he saw her made all the late nights sewing worthwhile. He was dressed in clean clothes, his hair neatly combed, looking more civilized than she had seen him, but somehow less comfortable, as if he was wearing a costume. "You look beautiful," he said, and there was such honest appreciation in his voice that Rebecca had to look down to hide her blush. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she managed. The ride into Ordway was pleasant, filled with easy conversation. Dalton pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the area, made her laugh with tales of his early days ranching when everything that could go wrong usually did. By the time they reached town, Rebecca felt relaxed and happy in a way she had not felt since before her father died. The dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building decorated with lanterns and ribbons. Music spilled out into the street, fiddle and guitar and the stomp of boots on wooden floors. People were gathered outside talking and laughing, and they called out greetings to Dalton as he helped Rebecca down from the wagon. Inside was a swirl of color and sound. Women in their best dresses, men in clean shirts, everyone moving and talking and enjoying the rare social occasion. Rebecca felt suddenly shy, aware of how few people she knew, how new she was to this town and this life. But Dalton kept a steady hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd, introducing her to people. "This is Miss Rebecca Bryant," he would say. "She is the cook at the 3 bars, and she is the reason my men have stopped threatening mutiny." People were friendly, welcoming even. The women wanted to know where she came from and how she was settling in. The men wanted to compliment Dalton on his good fortune in finding such an accomplished cook. It was overwhelming, but in a good way, and Rebecca found herself smiling until her cheeks hurt. Then the music shifted to a waltz, and Dalton turned to her with a slightly nervous expression. "I warned you about my dancing skills," he said, "but would you like to try anyway?" Rebecca had learned to dance from her mother, years ago, in the brief period when they had lived somewhere nice enough to have social occasions. She put her hand in Dalton's and let him lead her onto the floor. He had undersold his abilities. He was not a graceful dancer, but he was competent, and he was careful with her, guiding her through the steps with focused attention. Rebecca found herself relaxing into his arms, following his lead, aware of his hand at her waist and the warmth of him so close. "You are better at this than you claimed," she said. "I did not want you to be disappointed if I stepped on your toes," Dalton replied, "which I am trying very hard not to do. You are doing fine." They danced 3 more dances, and then Dalton insisted on getting her some punch and finding seats at the edge of the room. They sat close together, watching the other dancers, and Rebecca was hyper-aware of his thigh pressed against hers, the way his arm rested along the back of her chair. "I am glad you came tonight," Dalton said quietly. "So am I." Rebecca looked up at him, at this good man who had appeared in her life exactly when she needed him most. "Dalton, can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you really hire me? The truth this time?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the dancers. Then he said, "When I saw you in that store, you looked lost, like you were barely holding yourself together, but determined not to let anyone see it. I recognized that look because I wore it for years after my father died, and I realized I was facing this ranch alone. Someone helped me when I needed it most. The banker in town, actually, gave me better terms on the loans than I deserved because he saw I was willing to work. I have always told myself that if I got the chance to help someone else the way I was helped, I would take it. He turned to look at her. And then you told me you could only cook beans, and there was something about the way you said it. Like you were afraid I would laugh at you or turn you away, but you were being honest anyway. I liked that. I liked you. So I took a chance. I am glad you did, Rebecca said softly. So am I. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Rebecca could not quite name. Then someone called Dalton's name, and the spell broke. He went to speak with some rancher about cattle prices, and Rebecca found herself pulled into conversation with a group of women who wanted to know all about life at the 3 bars. The evening passed in a pleasant blur, and it was near midnight when Dalton finally collected her for the ride home. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds on black velvet. Rebecca leaned against Dalton's shoulder without quite meaning to, tired and happy, and felt his arm come around her to steady her. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "I have not had this much fun in a long time." "We will have to make it a regular thing then," Dalton said. "The dances, I mean, they happen every month. I would like that." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and then Dalton said, "Rebecca, I want to be honest with you about something." Her heart jumped. "All right. When I hired you, it was purely because I needed a cook. That is the truth. But somewhere along the way, my feelings have become less than professional. I look forward to meals not because of the food, but because it means I get to see you. I make excuses to stay late in the kitchen just to have a few more minutes of conversation. I think about you when I should be thinking about work." He paused. "I am telling you this because I do not want you to feel uncomfortable or pressured. If you want to keep things strictly as employer and employee, I will respect that completely. But I wanted you to know where I stand." Rebecca's breath caught. In the moonlight, Dalton's profile was all strong lines and shadows, and her heart was doing wild things in her chest. "And where do you stand exactly?" "I stand at the edge of falling in love with you," Dalton said quietly. "If I have not already fallen." The wagon had stopped without her noticing, pulled up in front of her quarters. Dalton turned to face her, and the expression on his face was open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I do not know much about love," Rebecca said slowly. "My parents loved each other, but my father died and my mother followed him in grief, and it always seemed like love caused more pain than joy. But being here, being with you, even just cooking meals and talking about nothing important, it makes me happy. You make me happy. And I think that might be the start of love, maybe, if you are patient with me while I figure it out." Dalton reached up and cupped her face gently, his calloused thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I have all the patience in the world for you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, a question more than a demand. Rebecca kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as her own. It was sweet and tentative and perfect, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I should probably let you get some rest," Dalton said, though he made no move to let her go. "Probably," Rebecca agreed, not moving either. They stole another kiss and another, and it was a good while before Rebecca finally made it inside her quarters. She lay in bed, touching her lips, replaying the evening over and over. She had come to Montana with nothing but desperation and a wagon full of regret. Now she had a job, a home, and a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. Life, she thought, had a funny way of working out. The next few weeks passed in a golden haze. Dalton courted her properly, despite the fact that she lived on his ranch and cooked his meals. He brought her wildflowers he picked on his rides around the property. He saved the best cuts of beef for her to cook, claiming they were for the men but winking at her when he said it. He found excuses to be near her, helping with tasks she could have done herself, talking with her while she worked. The men noticed, of course. It would have been impossible not to. But they seemed pleased rather than resentful, treating Rebecca with even more respect now that it was clear the boss had serious intentions. Frank pulled her aside one morning and said, "That boy has been alone too long. You are good for him. Good for all of us, really, but especially for him." Rebecca had not thought about it that way, but Frank was right. Dalton seemed lighter these days, smiled more easily, laughed at jokes instead of just acknowledging them with a nod. The weight he carried seemed less heavy somehow, distributed across two sets of shoulders instead of one. One evening in late July, after the dinner dishes were done and the men had all retired to the bunkhouse, Dalton asked Rebecca to walk with him. They strolled away from the buildings, toward the creek that ran through the property, the last light of day painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "I have been thinking," Dalton said, then stopped. "Actually, I have been thinking about this since about the second week you were here, but I wanted to give it time, make sure I was not being impulsive." Rebecca's heart started racing. "Thinking about what? About the future. About what I want my life to look like." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Rebecca, I know we have not known each other long, just over 2 months, but I have never been more certain of anything than I am about my feelings for you. You have taken this place and made it a home instead of just a ranch. You have made me remember that there is more to life than work and responsibility. You have made me happy in ways I did not even know I was missing." "Dalton," Rebecca whispered, her throat tight. "I want to marry you," he said simply. "I want to wake up with you every morning and go to sleep with you every night. I want to build a life together, raise a family if we are blessed with one, grow old watching the sun set over these mountains. I want you to be my partner in all things, not just my cook. I know I am not romantic or particularly exciting. I'm just a rancher who spends his days covered in dirt and working too hard. But I will love you with everything I have, Rebecca. I will spend every day trying to make you as happy as you make me. So I am asking you, will you marry me?" Rebecca looked at this man, this good, honest, hard-working man who had seen her at her lowest and offered her not pity but opportunity, who had respected her boundaries while making his feelings clear, who looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was exactly what he had been waiting for without knowing it. "Yes," she said, and then laughed at the pure joy that spread across his face. "Yes, Dalton Ward, I will marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, and Rebecca laughed and held on and felt lighter than air. When he set her down, he kissed her with considerably more passion than their previous chaste embraces, and Rebecca kissed him back with equal enthusiasm, her hands in his hair, his arms tight around her waist. "I do not have a ring yet," Dalton said when they finally came up for air. "But I will get you one, the best one I can afford." "I do not need a ring," Rebecca said. "I just need you. You will have both." He kissed her forehead. "When do you want to get married? We can make it a big affair if you want, invite people, have a proper celebration." Rebecca thought about it. She had no family to invite, no friends from her previous life she wanted to see again. Her life had truly started the day she rolled into Ordway with nothing but desperation and hope. "I do not need big," she said. "I just need it to be real. We can go to the church in town, have the pastor marry us, maybe invite the people we care about. Simple and quick." "Next Saturday then," Dalton said. "That gives us a week to make arrangements. Is that too soon?" "It is perfect." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and Dalton announced their engagement to the men that evening. There were cheers and congratulations, and Frank immediately started planning a party for after the ceremony. Tommy, the quiet boy, blushed and stammered out that he was real happy for them. The other men clapped Dalton on the back and told Rebecca she was getting a good man, which she already knew. The week before the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Rebecca sewed herself a proper wedding dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Dalton rode into town and came back with a ring, a delicate gold band with a small sapphire, the color of the Montana sky. It fit perfectly. They were married on a sunny Saturday morning in the small church in Ordway. The pastor who performed the ceremony had a kind face and a gentle voice. Frank stood up as Dalton's best man, and the wife of the general store owner served as Rebecca's witness, a woman named Martha, who had taken Rebecca under her wing during her visits to town. The men from the ranch filled the pews, along with a surprising number of townspeople who had come to wish them well. Rebecca walked down the short aisle alone, holding a bouquet of wildflowers Dalton had picked for her that morning. When she reached his side and saw the way he was looking at her, with such open love and devotion, her throat got tight and her eyes stung. The ceremony was brief. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promised to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. Dalton slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. The pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and when Dalton kissed her, the small church erupted in applause. They rode back to the ranch in Dalton's wagon, now festooned with ribbons and flowers courtesy of some of the ranch hands. A celebration waited for them, tables set up outside laden with food that people had brought, music provided by a couple of the men who played fiddle and harmonica. It was simple and joyful and exactly right. As the sun set and the party continued, Dalton pulled Rebecca aside, into the shadows away from the lights and music. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy I can barely stand it," Rebecca said honestly. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream." "It is real," Dalton assured her. "You are my wife now, Rebecca Ward, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret you," she said, then kissed him to prove it. They had turned the main house into their home. Rebecca had moved her things from the small room to the larger bedroom upstairs, the room Dalton had been using alone for so many years. It felt strange at first, sharing such an intimate space, but Dalton was patient and gentle, and Rebecca found that what could have been awkward instead felt natural and right. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and careful touches, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, lying in Dalton's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Rebecca felt a peace she had never known before. This was what she had been missing her whole life. Not just love, but belonging. A place and a person that were completely hers. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Dalton said, his arms tightening around her. "So much it scares me sometimes." "Scares you how?" "I keep thinking about how close I came to never meeting you. If you had gone to a different town, if you had walked into that store 5 minutes later or earlier, if I had not happened to be there buying supplies that day. So many little things that had to line up perfectly, and if even one had been different, I would still be alone. It terrifies me to think about." Rebecca propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "But those things did line up. We did meet, and now we have a whole life ahead of us. You cannot spend it being afraid of what might have been." "You are right." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I will focus on being grateful instead." They fell into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. Rebecca continued to cook for the men, though now she had helped Dalton hired a young woman from town named Sarah to assist in the kitchen a few days a week, giving Rebecca some breathing room. The men teased Dalton mercilessly about being a newlywed, but he took it with good humor, clearly too happy to be bothered by jokes. Rebecca loved being married, loved waking up next to Dalton and falling asleep in his arms. She loved running the ranch house, making it a real home instead of just a place to sleep. She planted a garden and filled the windows with curtains she sewed herself. She learned the business side of ranching, sitting with Dalton in the evenings as he went over the books, offering suggestions and asking questions until she understood the finances as well as he did. In October, nearly 6 months after she had arrived at the 3 bars, Rebecca realized she had missed her monthly courses. Then she missed another month. The signs were unmistakable, and she felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. A baby. She was going to have Dalton's baby. She told him one evening after dinner when they were alone in their bedroom. "I have some news," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Dalton looked up from the book he was reading. "Good news, I hope, given that expression." "I think so. I hope you will think so too." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, around May, I think." For a moment, Dalton just stared at her, processing. Then his face transformed, joy spreading across his features like sunrise. "A baby, Rebecca, are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I am sure." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight but carefully, as if she might break. "This is the best news, the absolute best news. We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "You have given me so much already. A home, a purpose beyond just work, love that I never thought I would find, and now a child." "Rebecca, I do not have words for how full my heart is right now." They told the ranch hands the next morning, and the men were genuinely excited, already making plans to build a cradle and offering advice based on their own experiences as fathers or brothers or uncles. Frank, the grizzled cowboy, got misty-eyed and had to excuse himself to go check on some fence that definitely did not need checking. The winter was mild, thankfully, because Rebecca felt every bit of the pregnancy. Morning sickness plagued her for weeks, though Dalton was wonderful about it, bringing her dry crackers and ginger tea, rubbing her back when she was miserable, never complaining about being woken up at odd hours. As her belly grew, he became almost comically protective, not wanting her to lift anything heavy or work too hard, until Rebecca had to gently remind him that women had been having babies for all of human history, and she was perfectly capable of cooking dinner. In March, when the snow started to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Dalton hired another woman to take over all of Rebecca's kitchen duties. "I do not want you on your feet all day," he said firmly. "Not this close to your time. Sarah can manage the cooking with some help, and you need to rest." Rebecca wanted to argue, but the truth was she was exhausted and her back ached constantly. She let herself be convinced, spending her days sewing baby clothes and preparing the small room next to their bedroom as a nursery. Dalton built a beautiful cradle from oak, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and it made Rebecca cry to see the care he put into every detail. Their son was born on a warm May evening, after a labor that lasted most of a day and left Rebecca exhausted but triumphant. The doctor from town had come to assist, and Dalton held Rebecca's hand through it all, looking slightly terrified but refusing to leave her side. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Dalton cut the cord with shaking hands and then wept openly as he held his son for the first time. "He is so small," Dalton said in wonder, "and perfect. Rebecca, look what we made." "David," Rebecca said softly, having decided on the name weeks ago. "David Thomas Ward." "David," Dalton repeated, testing it out. "Hello, David. Welcome to the world, son." Being parents was harder than either of them had anticipated. David was a colicky baby who did not sleep well, which meant neither did they. Rebecca was sore and healing and dealing with the reality that her body had been through something monumental. But when she watched Dalton with their son, the way he held him so carefully, talked to him in a soft voice, walked him around the room at 3 in the morning when he would not stop crying, her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. The ranch hands were utterly smitten with baby David. They took turns visiting, bringing gifts they had made themselves: a rocking horse, a stuffed bear, a set of wooden blocks. Frank appointed himself honorary grandfather and could often be found in the rocking chair holding the baby, telling him stories about cattle drives and the old days. The years that followed were full and rich. David grew from a fussy infant into a curious toddler, following his father around the ranch, getting into everything. When he was 3, Rebecca became pregnant again, and their daughter Emma was born in the spring of 1881. She was an easier baby, thankfully, with Dalton's gray eyes and Rebecca's dark hair. Life settled into a pattern. The ranch prospered under Dalton's management, expanding to 400 head of cattle. They built a bigger house, with more bedrooms and a proper parlor, though they kept the original structure as a guest house. Rebecca hired more help for the kitchen and the house, women from town who needed work, paying them fair wages and treating them with respect. The town of Ordway grew too. The railroad came through in 1882, bringing new opportunities for shipping cattle. Dalton became one of the area's most successful ranchers, respected for his fair dealing and honest work. But success did not change him. He was still the same man who got up before dawn to check on the cattle, who worked alongside his men rather than just giving orders, who came home every evening to have dinner with his family. Rebecca continued to cook occasionally, though now it was just for special occasions or when she felt like it. She never forgot those early days, though, when beans and cornbread were all she could confidently make, when Dalton had looked at her across a store and decided to take a chance. She made beans at least once a week, and they remained Dalton's favorite, just as he had promised all those years ago. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Rebecca into town for dinner at the new hotel restaurant, leaving the children with Frank and his wife, who had moved to the area and now lived in the guest house. It was rare to have time alone, and they savored it, talking and laughing like they had in those early days of courtship. "You ever miss it?" Dalton asked over dessert. "The adventure, the excitement? I know ranch life can be pretty monotonous." Rebecca considered the question seriously. "I think I had enough adventure before I met you to last a lifetime. What we have, this life we built, it is exactly what I need. Every morning I wake up grateful. For you, for our children, for the home we have made. That is not monotonous. That is precious." Dalton reached across the table to take her hand. "I fell in love with you that first day in the store. Did I ever tell you that? The moment you apologized for only being able to cook beans with that mixture of pride and fear on your face, I was done for. I just did not know it yet. I fell in love with you when you said beans would be your favorite forever," Rebecca said, "because I knew you meant it. You are a man who means what he says and says what he means, Dalton Ward. It is one of the 1,000 things I love about you." "Only 1,000, he teased. "At least 1,000. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, but also the passion that had never quite faded. Afterward, Rebecca lay in her husband's arms and thought about the path that had led her here. The loss of her parents, the desperate journey west, the fear and uncertainty. It had all been worth it to end up exactly here in this moment with this man. Their children grew. David became his father's shadow, learning ranching from the ground up, proving to have a natural talent for working with horses. Emma was more interested in books and numbers, eventually taking over keeping the ranch accounts when she was barely a teenager, organizing them with an efficiency that impressed everyone. In 1888, Rebecca's 32nd year, they had another son, Daniel. He was a surprise, as they had thought their family was complete, but a welcome one. Daniel was a happy baby who grew into an easy-going boy, content to follow wherever his older siblings led. The ranch continued to prosper. They survived droughts and hard winters, cattle sickness and market crashes. Through it all, Dalton and Rebecca worked as a team, making decisions together, supporting each other through the hard times, celebrating the good ones. They fought occasionally, as any couple did, but they never went to bed angry, never let problems fester. Frank passed away in the winter of 1892, and the whole ranch mourned him. He had been a constant presence, a grandfather to their children, a friend and advisor to Dalton. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley he had loved, and Dalton made sure his widow was taken care of for the rest of her life. New ranch hands came and went, but a core group stayed, men who became like family. They watched David and Emma and Daniel grow up, teaching them how to rope and ride, how to work hard and treat people fairly. It was the kind of community Rebecca had never known in her childhood, and she treasured it. When David turned 18 in 1897, he asked to take on more responsibility in the ranch operations. He had ideas for expanding, for trying new breeding techniques he had read about. Dalton listened carefully to his son's proposals and then agreed to most of them, proud of the man David was becoming. Emma, at 15, was already being courted by the banker's son, a smart young man who recognized her intelligence and valued it rather than being intimidated. One evening that summer, sitting on the porch watching the sun set, Dalton said, "We built something good here." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, as comfortable with him now as she had been nervous that first day. "We did. Do you remember when you told me you could only cook beans?" "How could I forget? It was possibly the most embarrassing moment of my life," Rebecca laughed. "I was so desperate for work, and that was what came out of my mouth." "It was perfect," Dalton said. "It was honest and real and exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. I think I knew then that you were going to be important to me. I just did not know how much." 21 years, Rebecca marveled. "It does not feel that long." "The best years of my life," Dalton said. "Every single one of them." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. The sounds of the ranch drifted to them, cattle lowing, horses moving in the corral, the distant voices of ranch hands finishing up the day's work. Inside the house, their children were probably getting into some kind of mischief, and there would be dinner to organize and a dozen small tasks to handle before bed. It was ordinary and mundane and absolutely perfect. The years continued their steady march. Emma married the banker's son in a beautiful ceremony in 1900, and they settled in Ordway, where her husband worked at his father's bank, and Emma became known for her sharp business sense and charitable work. David took over more and more of the ranch operations as Dalton started to slow down, not old but no longer young, content to let his son prove himself. Daniel, the surprise baby who was not such a baby anymore, showed an interest in becoming a veterinarian and went off to school in Denver, though he promised to come back and use his skills on the ranch. In 1905, Emma gave Rebecca and Dalton their first grandchild, a girl named Sarah after Rebecca's kitchen helper from all those years ago. Holding that baby, seeing her daughter as a mother, Rebecca felt the circle completing itself. She thought about her own mother, gone so many years now, and wished she could have known this joy of grandchildren and a life well lived. Dalton's hair turned gray, then white. Rebecca's dark hair gained silver threads that she refused to dye, wearing them as badges of honor. They moved a little slower, needed a little more rest, but they were healthy and active, still deeply involved in ranch life. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1906, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Emma came with her husband and 3 children now. Daniel rode in from Denver, where he had just completed his studies. David and his new wife, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, hosted the party at the main house. The celebration was elaborate, with people coming from all over the territory to wish them well. There was dancing and music, and more food than anyone could eat. Speeches were made praising Dalton's integrity and business acumen, Rebecca's kindness and community involvement. But the most touching moment came when David stood up, holding his young son, and said simply, "Thank you for showing me what a good marriage looks like, what a good life looks like. Everything I know about being a man, I learned from watching you, Pa. And everything I know about building a home, I learned from watching you, Ma. I hope I can make you proud." Rebecca was crying, and so was half the room. Dalton stood and hugged his son and grandson, his voice thick with emotion as he said, "You already make us proud, son. Every single day." That night, long after the guests had gone and the house had quieted, Dalton and Rebecca walked out to the creek where he had proposed to her all those years ago. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. 30 years, Dalton said. It went so fast. "And yet I remember every bit of it," Rebecca replied. "The big moments and the small ones. The first time David smiled, the day Emma learned to read, holding Daniel for the first time, but also just the everyday moments, making dinner while you read the paper, sitting together in the evenings, waking up next to you every morning. I told you once that I was standing at the edge of falling in love with you," Dalton said. "Do you remember?" "I remember. I think I am still falling, deeper every year. Is that possible, after 3 decades, to still feel like this?" Rebecca turned to face him, this man who had been her everything for more than half her life. His face was lined now, weathered by sun and time, but his eyes were the same storm gray that had captivated her in a general store in 1876. "I think that is exactly how it is supposed to be. Not falling out of love, but falling deeper into it, finding new reasons every day to cherish what we have." He kissed her, and it was sweet and familiar and still sparked something in her heart. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear or uncertainty, all of it exactly the same because it led me to you. Even the beans," Rebecca teased, "especially the beans." Dalton smiled. "They are still my favorite, you know, just like I promised." Rebecca did know. He ate them every week without fail, always made a point to compliment them, always remembered that first dinner when she had been so nervous and he had been so kind. It was a small thing, but it represented something bigger, the way he had kept every promise he ever made to her, the way he valued her not despite her limitations, but because of her honesty about them. They walked back to the house hand in hand, through the ranch they had built together, past the buildings and corrals that represented decades of hard work and shared dreams. Lights glowed in windows, evidence of families sleeping under roofs they had helped provide. Cattle moved in distant pastures, the backbone of an enterprise that now employed 20 men and supported dozens of families. It had all started with beans, with a desperate woman and a lonely man, and a moment of honest vulnerability in a general store. Such a small thing to build a life on, but they had proved it was enough. More than enough. As they climbed into bed that night, Rebecca thought about the girl she had been, scared, alone, with nothing but $17 and a wagon full of regret. If she could go back and tell that girl what was waiting for her, what she was going to find in the mountains of Montana, would she believe it? Probably not. The happiness was too big, too complete, too much to imagine when standing in the ashes of loss. But it had all been real, every bit of it. The love, the family, the home, the life. All of it built on the foundation of a man who heard her say she could only cook beans and decided that was exactly what he needed. Dalton pulled her close, and Rebecca settled into her favorite place in the world, wrapped in her husband's arms, safe and loved and home. Outside, the Montana wind sang through the valley, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Inside, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love well earned, Rebecca Bryant Ward closed her eyes and smiled. She had never been happier. And she knew, with the certainty of 30 years together, that Dalton felt exactly the same way. It was everything she had never known to hope for, delivered in the most unexpected package, sustained by the simplest of ingredients: love, trust, partnership. And yes, beans which really were Dalton's favorite forever, just as he had promised, just as she had always known they would be. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished slightly with each generation but always containing the essential truth. A woman who apologized for her limitations. A man who saw opportunity instead of failure. A chance meeting that became a lifetime. Their grandchildren would grow up hearing about the beans, would laugh at the sweet simplicity of it, would learn from it the lesson that true love accepts us as we are rather than demanding we be something different. They would see, in the way their grandparents still looked at each other after decades, what real partnership looked like. And many years later, when Dalton and Rebecca were both gone, laid to rest on that same hill where Frank had been buried, overlooking the valley they had loved, the ranch would continue. The 3 bars would pass to David, and then to his children, generation after generation, maintaining the legacy of hard work and fair dealing that Dalton had established. But more than that, they would maintain the legacy of love, of giving people chances, of seeing past surfaces to the potential beneath, of understanding that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings. And every week, without fail, the Ward family would have beans for dinner. It became a tradition, a reminder, a way of honoring the love story that had started it all. The recipe was Rebecca's, carefully written down and passed through the generations, and it was perfect every time: simple, hearty, honest food made with care, just like the love that had inspired it. Just like the man who had declared it his favorite forever. Just like the life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work, and a willingness to believe in second chances. The beans, it turned out, were never just about the beans at all. They were about seeing value where others saw only limitation, about turning vulnerability into strength, about a man who knew what he wanted and a woman who found the courage to accept it. They were about love in its purest, simplest, most enduring form, and they really were quite delicious.